My fellow Americans.
You might be wondering, why in the world is there a 30-minute countdown before the show starts? Well, we actually start live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time, so this whole 30-minute countdown is a chance for YouTube and Rumble to send out their alerts and notifications, so we encourage... Welcome, everyone, to Redacted on this Thursday. I'm Clayton Morris.
I'm Natali Morris.
And on this show, we cover the stories the mainstream media largely ignores. Tonight, we're going to look at the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum and the massive surveillance and massive satellite surveillance that's going to be put up around the world to be tracking your carbon footprint. We're also going to look at the new smart wall that when you enter, exit the United States, you'll be tracked, monitored, all of that. Of course, this is a World Economic Forum's like wet dream right now. So all of this is coming together, and we're going to have journalist Whitney Webb here on the show to break all of that down for you tonight.
Plus, we're going to talk about the new World Health Organization. Wrong, Globalist Society.
I know, they're all the same.
Not the WEF, the WHO and their pandemic treaty. Remember, we were due a draft of what they were going to vote on. Major changes. We're going to go through it and figure out how worried we need to be that your country wants to sign over its sovereignty to the WHO.
And we talked about it a little bit last night. Maybe this is like a silver lining, finally, when people are saying, like, we feel like we can't beat these guys. We can't beat these guys. Well, maybe this WHO pandemic treaty retreat is a sign that we actually are, in fact, beating them. So we'll talk about that.
All right, but spoiler alert, I still don't want it.
Okay, don't spoil it.
I'm just going to say it's still crap, but less crap.
Yeah, I don't want it either, of course. But
okay.
So we'll talk about that. We're also going to look at why Justin Trudeau is going hard against Alex Jones and calling anyone who would stand up against their carbon tax an extremist. Like, you're an extremist if you don't vote for their 23% increase in the carbon tax, which is all a scam to begin with. So Pierre Poilievre popped out at a rally yesterday. He was just driving along and he saw an anti-carbon tax protest. He just got out of his car. It wasn't a planned event. And there happened to be a whole bunch of signs that said F Trudeau. And he's like, I'm going to say hi to these guys. Anyway, Justin Trudeau was asked about all of this and the extremist position of people who would stand up against this carbon tax BS. So we'll talk about that on the show as well.
Plus a United Nations meeting coming up for a technocratic takeover. It's called the Summit of the Future. The United Nations is going to make a pact for the future. It's basically, globalism. We're going to keep our eye on that because that's coming up in September. And journalist Derek Brose has been following this, and he's going to tell us all about it.
So we're going to get to Whitney Webb here in a moment, and we're going to do a deep dive on all of these moving pieces. She's just written a fantastic new piece in Bitcoin Magazine about the satellite infrastructure that's being used to surveil all of us. We're going to talk about that. I want to ask her also about this smart wall. And, you think, oh, that's how you're going to protect the U.S. borders right now is with a smart wall, right? No. It's totally different. They're going to be surveilling you. This just goes part and parcel with that new FISA renewal that we just had from the United States Congress. So this is all happening right now. We'll get there in a second. But first, we're going to tell you about our friends over at Lear. They are, of course, our big sponsor for tonight and sponsoring our show. And the Fed just threw up its hands saying inflation is here to stay, and they are done trying to fight it, basically. The cost of everything up 30%. Food prices, as we talked about last night, experts predict food prices could double by 2025. That is unbelievable trajectory right now for the cost of everything. Energy costs, food costs, and of course, rent costs also up right now. So if you've got some savings, I hope you do at this point. I don't know if Bidenomics is like eating away at it right now. Maybe you want to take some of that money out of US dollars that are losing value every day and converting it either to silver or gold. Now, gold right now is at an all-time high, ridiculously expensive for gold right now. However, silver is a fraction of that cost. So even if it's a couple $100s or something like that, and you want to convert that over to silver, I highly recommend it. Natali and I are big silver investors as well as gold investors. And it's just a matter of, if you've got a few $1,000s in a savings account, how can you transfer that over into gold or silver to protect your family right now, because the US dollar continues to erode. Anyway, our friends at Lear Capital can help you get set up with that. Just give them a call. Call their 800 number, 1-800-613-3557. They'll help you with this. They'll ship your silver coins right to your house. You can keep them in your gun vault if you want, your gun safe, or you can have them stored off-site in a 24-hour protected facility. It's totally up to you, where you do you. Again, just call their 800 number, 1-800-613-3557, or go to their website, learredacted.com, and you can actually get up to $15,000 in free bonus medals with a qualified purchase. So check them out today, learredacted.com, or call their 1-800 number, 800-613-3557. Well, thousands of satellites being sent up into the sky to monitor your carbon footprint, watching everything you do. Is this part of a larger plan around CBDCs, our digital IDs, tracking everything we do? I know it sounds like science fiction, but it's actually happening, and our next guest has written extensively about it, called Debt from Above, a new piece that our next guest, Whitney Webb, has just written. The Carbon Credit Coup. Latin America is quietly being forced into a carbon market scheme through regional contractual obligations enforced by satellites of a U.S. intelligence-linked firm. So launching satellites into the sky to watch everything we do as part of what? Sort of a social credit score, sort of our carbon score. You've traveled too much this week, so you are locked down. You're not allowed to leave your house. Let's find out what this actually means for all of us. I know, again, this sounds like science fiction, but Whitney Webb has been warning us about it for a couple of years now, and she joins us now. And a great investigative journalist. Whitney, welcome back to the show.
Hey, great to be here, Clayton. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So you've been following, of course, the move towards central bank digital currencies, digital IDs, tracking everything. They want us to stop using cash. We're seeing that, of course. You just go to a lot of different restaurants now, a lot of different businesses. Sorry, we don't accept cash. In the European Union, if you use over a certain threshold of cash, you're considered part of the gray market. You're considered part of people who they would consider terrorists, like be watching you, as Christine Lagarde has said, the European Commissioner. So is this satellite launching as part of this tracking in moving towards central bank digital currencies?
Yeah, so the end goal of this is to have it integrated with all of these things. So one of the pillars of the economy to come doesn't just include CBDCs and their private sector equivalents. It also includes carbon markets. And one of the main architects of this coming system, people like Mark Carney, the UN envoy for climate finance, who was previously head of the Central Bank of England and also Canada, has been one of the point men for this. And there's a lot of different factors that are going to feed into this new financial system. So you touched on a few, like digital ID, and also like the digital wallet. And carbon markets are meant to be part of that. And that's why some of the key entities that are being used to create and develop this system, like the World Bank, for example, that's why we've had Carney, BlackRock's Larry Fink, for example, say the key to tackling climate change is reimagining the World Bank specifically. In other parts of the multilateral development banking system, they're working alongside groups like Google's philanthropic arm, google.org, on creating climate wallets. And a lot of that program specifically is tied into the program that I wrote about with Bitcoin Magazine's editor-in-chief, Mark Goodwin, this Debt from Above piece. I was talking specifically about this program called Green Plus that shares affiliations with that same entity housed within the World Bank called the Climate Action Data Trust that's producing this climate wallet. Green Plus specifically claims to be focusing for now on monitoring the protected areas of all of Latin America. But they say in their press release discussing their affiliation with this satellite company that has various ties to intelligence, that the goal is to monitor your carbon emissions from space as part of this metric known as the global footprint, or the ecological footprint which is promoted by this group called the Global Footprint Network, which has its antecedents in the Club of Rome, which people may know of because it came under scrutiny during when the World Economic Forum came under scrutiny from independent media in the COVID era, because the Club of Rome was popularized this paper called The Limits of Growth, and produced a book on the subject that was very intimately tied to the earliest meetings of the World Economic Forum. And it's basically this idea that we will surpass the limits to growth if we don't change course and deindustrialize. And a lot of this mentality that's in the modern mainstream environmental movement has its antecedents with that particular organization. But the Club of Rome, if you look at the people that created it, it's families like the Rockefeller family who have been notorious in the early 20th century and before for funding the eugenics movement, specifically seeing the growth of population in Latin America as a threat to global security, among other things, and also wanting to deindustrialize the planet for the benefit of its the oligarchs that are essentially have been running the Club of Rome and related groups for some time. They're essentially very, very focused on trying to keep the global South under the thumb of, well, really it's colonialism, but under different names. And they framed it as environmentalism at this point, but it's an effort to control industrial levels and population levels. And these are the different metrics that they've invented for it. But the Club of Rome has been criticized for a very long time for essentially being neo-Malthusian definitely not necessary. I would argue that they're not really so much interested in saving the planet as they are in micromanaging society. It's really more of a push for a technocratic system of governance, which is something that the World Economic Forum and these other entities have been promoting and leading us towards for some time. And a lot of this system that that's been developed by these different groups over the years rests or rather requires things like the digital ID and all of these different things to function. And what's interesting about this Green Plus program in particular is that they're trying to place this specifically on the Bitcoin blockchain through a sidechain protocol that is linked to Bitcoin called Rootstock. And so there's these efforts to have, if people like Larry Fink have come out and said everything is going to be on a universal ledger, as he's talking about, the launch of Bitcoin ETFs and all the tokenization of real world asset efforts. And this goes, this is the digital ID agenda. It's essential to this new financial system they're trying to make. And carbon markets are a key part of it, but they've been routinely overlooked, I would argue.
I mean, my mind goes directly to seeing these satellites creating an entire web around the Earth that they can monitor sort of hot spots where countries, industries are using too much carbon. They're burning too much carbon. They're burning too much, quote unquote, fossil fuels. Your ships, your long haul trucks have exceeded a certain cap. Get ready for some sort of government regulation as a result of it. Seems where it starts, maybe at that high level, but then it's going to affect all of us. I mean, I feel like it's going to come and affect me. It's going to affect you. It's going to be something that they're going to try to use against individual citizens.
Yeah, well, they're going to frame it as voluntary and as sort of something that's applying to everyone. But really, it's going to be a way to enforce this neo-feudal economic paradigm they're trying to impose on everyone, because the wealthy, the elite, will be able to afford carbon offsets for all of these different activities that they want to do to engage in their existing lifestyle.
It's such a joke, isn't it?
But regular people like us will not.
It's like plenary indulgences, right? For our folks who understand their history and religion, right? You could buy plenary indulgences if you wanted to sin, right? If you had enough money. I mean, I guess that's
very
sort of like,
similar.
That's what it's like. One day someone I think might have corrected me and said they still actually exist. I don't know if plenary. Someone who's watching right now can let me know if you can still buy basically your way through allowing yourself to sin within a church.
Yeah.
But it's crazy.
Yes, well, they've essentially been reinvented in some sense as carbon markets. And what's interesting is that carbon markets, despite their central the central aspect they're poised to play in this coming financial system, have generated a lot of controversy. They've been routinely found to be, essentially over 90% worthless. A lot of the ones on existing markets, and some of the biggest carbon credit certifiers in the world have been wrapped up in these scandals. But the answer has not been to clamp down or change anything that would prevent fraud or grift in the industry. Instead, it's to insure carbon credits. So they've instead created a new market for the insurance industry to try and create what they call a high credibility carbon market to try and restore investor confidence. But really, they're just, allowing this grift and this fraud that's been rampant in the market up until now to continue. They're just adding an insurance layer to it. So now you'll have to pay more to insure your carbon credits, or pay slightly more for your carbon offsets, and things of that nature. So,
and as we move away from cash, we move away from hard assets and move away from owning things. Of course, they do not really want you to own homes. They want you to be part of this sort of collective, this digital collective now, and where they're going to be monitoring all of us through this digital wallet structure. It seems like we've had
and
this.
You'll be renting everything.
Right. You won't be owning homes. There's been a number of articles over the past few months from a lot of high-profile media publications, and I've been bookmarking them and saving them, but I've seen this trend where it's promoting the idea that you shouldn't even own a single-family home anymore. That's not something that's good for you. It's not good for the environment. You shouldn't do that. It's not good for communities to have single-family homes. You shouldn't have a yard. You shouldn't have a driveway. And so there've been a lot of people pushing in this direction lately. And it seems to be a part of this process where you won't own homes. Can you talk a little bit about like the digital ID structure, and how do we have like a template on how this is going to look? We've heard all of these different examples. We have Dia, the Dia app in Ukraine, of course, where you can rat on your neighbors. You can pay for the subway. You can do all of those things. We hear about China, the social credit score. If you buy too much alcohol, it's your lose social credit score points and all of that. What of it is true? And can you piece all of these things together to give us a sense of what's coming to the United States?
Yeah, so the digital ID agenda is very similar to what's been rolled out in Ukraine and also in China. It's essentially housed within SDG 16, that being Sustainable Development Goal 16. That's been embraced essentially by all countries. And that's why you have, for example, essentially the vast majority of countries in the world in seeming lockstep over the course of this year and next year, implementing biometric entry and exit requirements. The U.S. is in an effort to the U.S. government is manufacturing consent through that right now by pushing the so-called smart wall as the solution to the U.S.-Mexico border crisis, for example. But you have even politicians that claim to rail against, for example, the CBDC agenda. People like Ron DeSantis have gone full steam ahead within the state of Florida, pushing for the Florida Smart ID card, which is produced by a World Economic Forum strategic partner, Thales, which I believe is based in France. The effort here is to basically have what Amazon and some of these other companies have been trying to roll out over the past couple of years, the idea that your identification will just be your face, your biometrics, and it's being framed as convenience. You have JP Morgan, for example, going full steam ahead also with the idea that instead of using a card at an ATM, you will just scan your face, and that will allow you access to get access money either through an ATM. But of course, we're moving through to a cashless society. So the idea is to have it be like it's been rolled out at Whole Foods: pay with your palm, pay with your face. And this is that's the financial component, but it's also meant to be your ID for all sorts of things. And that's why you have these entities like WorldCoin, for example, being rolled out. The idea is to have WorldCoin be, tied to a wallet. So when you sign up and scan your iris, you're given these World Coins. You're also given a unique identifier tied to your iris scan. And the idea is to have that not just be your ID when you're out, maybe doing things or trying to obtain certain services, but also your way of identifying yourself online. So it's also intimately tied to the efforts to end anonymity on the internet, which is a long-standing agenda that I've written about for a long time. And they've been trying to implement this in various countries, normally it's pretty frequently done under the guise of protecting children on the internet, or age verification for social media. That's also something that's been rolled out in Florida, and I would argue that it's essentially a Trojan horse for this type of stuff. The idea of trying to get you to link a government issued ID to your online activity. which is very troubling when we consider that a lot of the infrastructure set up in place by both the Biden administration, the Trump administration, and preceding administrations of this, the war on domestic terror is framed at linking your activity on social media and online in general to a government issued ID for the purpose of being able to prosecute you for crimes, speech crimes and things like that committed online, or use what you've said online previously and run it through predictive analytics using artificial intelligence to determine if you may commit a crime in the future. And this was actually promoted by the Trump administration, or figures within it. Jared Kushner and Ivanka were big proponents of it. It was creating this health DARPA department that Biden actually made. He called it ARPA-H, though. But the flagship program of that was called Safe Homes, and was about running American social media posts in mass through an artificial intelligence algorithm to identify early neuropsychiatric warning signs as an effort to prevent mass shootings before they occur. So, based on your social media post, AI will determine if your guns should be taken away, something like that. And that was being fielded during the Trump administration. So this is something that is obviously a bipartisan agenda, unfortunately, and it's housed within the UN Sustainable Development Goals. A lot of these different agendas can be found there. And I think we're seeing an unprecedented effort to have this marketed to people, specifically in the United States, under different metrics. So for a long time, a lot of these agendas had been framed sort of using left-leaning rhetoric and coming from the public sector. We're also seeing an effort now to shift that in an effort to manufacture consent to have it be a private sector thing. And this is something that's happened before in U.S. history, where, for example, after 9/11, there was an effort to create the surveillance program called Total Information Awareness as an office in DARPA, which is the Pentagon. And it was rightly criticized for ending U.S. privacy of U.S. citizens. And what they did instead is that they privatized it and they turned it into Palantir, which was created by Peter Thiel, for example, one of the co-founders of PayPal, and is now a contractor to every U.S. intelligence agency and serves all of the same functions that TIA, Total Information Awareness, was designed to do, including this predictive analytics stuff. And they also ran all the COVID data and all this other stuff. I mean, they've become a huge surveillance monster, essentially, at the end of the day. And oddly enough, the satellite company, as part of this Green Plus program, has teamed up with Palantir, has put Palantir in space, which was actually one of the final ambitions of the Total Information Awareness program. So you're having all of this being folded in with these various pillars of this new financial system, which again includes carbon markets, but also includes digital ID, ending online anonymity, and digital money that is both programmable and surveillable. And it's important to point out, too, that CBDCs are that, but there's also efforts to create private sector equivalents that are just as surveillable and programmable as CBDCs could be. It may not be the central bank programming them and passing your data to the government, but JP Morgan doing that is really, at a functional level, as far as it affects human freedom and civil liberties, really no different. And there's efforts to foist that upon the American public as well. The idea of, the stablecoin bill, for example, that's come up in Congress, and trying to create, regulations around dollar-based stablecoins. Those stablecoins, depending on who issues them, can be just as programmable and surveillable, if not more so, than anything that the Fed could potentially put out. And it's important to keep in mind, too, that the Federal Reserve is essentially owned by the private commercial banks in the United States. So having the private commercial banks directly issue programmable, surveillable money to the American public is really fundamentally no different than the Federal Reserve doing so, since they're ultimately controlled by the same entity. I mean, the most powerful bank in the Federal Reserve System is the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and the biggest shareholders and controllers of that are JP Morgan and Citigroup, as an example. So having JP Morgan and Citigroup issue stable coins that are programmable and surveillable and have that face the public, I mean, that's how you're getting the CBDC under a different name. But they're going to try and frame it as private sector innovation. And it's not we're against CBDC, just like Ron DeSantis and Trump have publicly said. But are they against are they against programmable, surveillable money, period? Are they against JP Morgan and Citigroup or BlackRock or whoever, any of these Wall Street entities issuing these types of currencies to people and having them use it? I haven't heard anything in that regard. And JP Morgan, for example, completely canceled the bank accounts of top executives at Dr. Mercola's company
Right.
without any explanation given. I mean, the private sector has done this. And have done it without really any meaningful backlash or any meaningful consequences. So to give them, the ability to control and surveil our money, that I think there's going to be a distinct effort to do that. And it's interesting too is that when during the Trump administration, Jared Kushner was actually promoting the idea of creating a USD coin, a stable coin that functioned just like this, talking to Steve Mnuchin, who was Trump's Treasury Secretary. And actually, Steve Mnuchin is the person who chairs the board of this intelligence-linked satellite company surveilling carbon emissions in Latin America now. The U.S. government is very involved here. And as far as stable coins go, on the board of this company, satellite company, as well as a man named Howard Lutnick, who is the head of a financial services firm called Cantor Fitzgerald. And Cantor Fitzgerald is the biggest custodian of the treasury bills behind the largest US dollar stablecoin known as Tether, or USDT. And so I think, as you know, as discussed in this piece, there's a distinct effort also to have people in Latin America flock to these dollar-backed stablecoins that are sort of tied up in these carbon market agendas. And Tether, interestingly enough, even though it's framed as a service to bank the unbanked, recently allowed the FBI, the Secret Service, and U.S. intelligence agencies access to its platform so it can blacklist anyone. And it's presumably a private sector issued stablecoin to a degree, but it's also the biggest purchaser of U.S. Treasury bills or U.S. government debt. And there's a very, having people like Mnuchin, Cantor Fitzgerald tied up in this particular, carbon market surveillance paradigm that's been imposed in Latin America through these like opaque contractual agreements at the municipal level throughout the continent. Very big things are happening here. And actually the guy that runs Tether, a guy named Paolo Arduino, has openly said that the goal of Tether is to expand U.S. dollar hegemony worldwide. So there's definitely a play here to have this carbon market, at least as it relates to Latin America and how it's being opposed there, to have it essentially serve U.S. empire in a lot of ways. And I think that's reflected in the fact that this satellite company was created by career contractors to DARPA, to the NSA, to DHS, to all of these intelligence firms. They're, nominally an Argentinian firm, but, they're steeped in these ties to U.S. intelligence, partnered with Palantir, partnered with Musk SpaceX, chaired by Steve Mnuchin. Joseph Dunford, head of Joint Chiefs of Staff under Trump, is on the board of directors. There's obviously something very, very sinister, I would argue, going on here. And another thing that I should mention in the context of carbon markets is that when you certify a carbon credit based on a forest somewhere, let's say a chunk of Colombian rainforest, there becomes this issues of carbon rights. Who actually owns the rights to the carbon in the tree? The person that has bought the carbon credit, do they become the owners of the carbon represented in this particular forest? And there's actually no existing legal framework to say that, that's not the case. It definitely is being posited by certain groups involved in this, that there is a way to obtain land by purchasing the carbon credits. Or rather, if not directly obtaining the land, being able to exercise control over how that land is used and managed, or if it can even be exploited or things like this. So there's a lot of interesting issues here that are really troubling as it relates to Latin American, both financial sovereignty and environmental sovereignty, really. And also by creating these contractual agreements at the municipal level, you're going around national governments and going straight to local governments, which at least in Latin America are quite easy to bribe. Not that national governments aren't susceptible to that, but at the municipal level, there's a lot more entrenched corruption in that sense. It's a lot easier to influence them in that regard, and it doesn't get national media coverage because it's happening on the local level. And another thing I should point out too is that some of the actors here are career financial criminals. For example, one of the main funders of one of the entities behind this, who's actually a big figure in UN-backed green finance initiatives, is a man named Craig Kogut, who was directly and intimately involved in the junk bond scandal of Drexel Burnham Lambert in the 1980s. And oddly enough, the person who invented carbon credit trading was a senior vice president at Drexel Burnham Lambert when that same scandal was ongoing, named Richard Sander. And he's also the father of derivatives and the creator of the collateral mortgage obligation, or CMOs, which is essentially what caused the 2008 financial crisis. So you have people that have, been career toxic debt lords creating this new system of quote unquote green finance and imposing it on Latin America, which is, a continent that has been enslaved by debt through the IMF, the World Bank, and these same financial predators from Wall Street are reinventing these institutions, finding new ways, not just to continue that debt slavery model, but also, make land grabs of the natural world and the natural resources under the guise of conserving it, and adding this sense of urgency that if we don't implement these types of plans, everyone will die. The environment will collapse. The planet is doomed.
Right. They need to keep this narrative going that the earth is collapsing. It's on fire. We better stop this immediately. It's an existential threat, as you hear from President Biden and AOC. We even saw, she's the girlfriend or fiance of Jeff Bezos a few weeks ago at an Amazon event, showing off this new satellite initiative. What's going to go up, and they're going to be a part of this mapping of the earth to monitor the carbon on the planet. And she's super excited about it. She wants to really make sure that you don't eat meat, and she's going to be tracking all of this. This is a big initiative that they're very excited about over at Amazon and Jeff Bezos. What is his role in all of this?
Well, Jeff Bezos specifically, I haven't looked at too much. I do know he's very involved in the efforts to mine a bunch of nickel and lithium deposits through cobalt metals, where he's partnered with people like Bill Gates. And then on this particular satellite firm that's a focus of this article, one of the top chief information officers of Amazon, or Amazon Web Services, is represented on the board. But, Jeff Bezos and a lot of these billionaires are, the engines driving this. Silicon Valley billionaires are these particular, the real people that are generating the financial incentives for all these different companies to pop up and come together to create these markets, because, the UN is promoting them, but they're essentially public-private partnerships. And so the Silicon Valley entities and these billionaires, they finance NGOs and all these other groups that help, connect all of this together. But, at the end of the day, a lot of these Silicon Valley billionaires are interested in things like transhumanism, technocracy, and all these different systems. And they mask a lot of what they do under the guise of altruism. For example, one of the philosophical underpinnings of a lot of these Silicon Valley billionaires, they frame as effective altruism, which is Sam Bankman-Fried, for example, was an effective altruist and claimed to be, doing all these things out of altruistic motives, but it's not really altruism at the end of the day. It's about securing, their control and their role into the future in these new economic paradigms, where they'll be even more powerful than they are now, and will be even more dependent on them than we are now. And unfortunately, when she was working and advising this particular, was helping manage a project at Stanford Law that was specifically about using a carbon coin and carbon credits to enable U.S. government quantitative easing, which, of course, if you're not familiar with quantitative easing, it's the central bank policy of endless money printing. So basically using carbon-based life, tokenizing it so it can become a tradable financial project, and using that to enable insane fiscal irresponsibility, which is what quantitative easing essentially has been since it's been, widely used by the Federal Reserve. That's just totally insane. So there's all these efforts, because debt in the U.S. government debt is so bad, right? Where are we going to stuff all of this debt? Who's going to buy up all the treasuries and service all this debt? There's an effort to do it with carbon markets. There's an effort to do it with stable coins. And in this particular program that Mark Goodwin and I talk about in this article, they're coming together, and they're coming together in a way where it's being contractually imposed on the global south without people here in Latin America, because I live here, without people here having any idea this is going on. No consent.
You know, I want to do a whole separate interview on this border wall and how you mentioned it briefly, but I just want to get your sense of what that actually looks like. So we've been talking about, building the wall. Trump's, building the wall. That hasn't happened. The U.S. southern border is just, of course, wide open. Upwards of 10, maybe more millions of illegal immigrants have poured across the U.S. southern border. And now talk of this digital wall. What will that look like, and how would it actually help America, or will it?
So the idea is, it's not just the physical border. The idea is to have this biometric entry and exit program implemented through every port of entry in the United States. So that's terrestrial, that's airports, that's, in ports. Also, anywhere you would enter the U.S. or exit the U.S. is to have it be a biometric system. And so TSA, for example, has been rolling this out. There's been efforts to get people to voluntarily, at least at first, on board. And, you can get through security faster if you scan your face and upload your biometrics and make this profile with this particular company, or do it through TSA. And that same type of system is what they want to have at on the physical border as well. And, they've said, for example, because this is also being rolled out in the European Union and in the United Kingdom, they've said that they've tried to sell it as saying this will reduce wait times because your ID is your face. Right. But actually, they've shown that it's going to, at least in the case of the UK, between EU and UK travel, increase the wait time 10 times over. So that's not necessarily true. Yeah, it's not about convenience. It's about surveillance. It's about this, facial recognition, having everything you do be tied to your biometrics. And that doesn't just include what you're doing in the physical world. That's meant to also include what you're doing in the online world, and have it be all that data being compiled and analyzed by AI to determine if you're a threat to order and things like that.
So your web surfing,
not necessarily that's going to be rolled out right away. Those components of it, but it's on the books, and that's the plan.
That's the dream, right? They'll know your web surfing history. They'll know all of that. Your social media posts. Do you hang out? Do you go to Infowars.com and listen to Alex Jones? Are you that type of a person? Do you read conservative websites? Do you interact with, or what kind of apps are you using? You're using your face to open up your phone all the time. Like, this is the dream. So they'd have all of that information.
Yes. And the infrastructure put out by the Biden administration on the war on domestic terror frames people who are concerned about government overreach as being potential domestic terrorists. So you don't even have to be a conservative or anything like that. You can just be concerned about perceived government overreach, and you can be put on a list under these type of metrics. And it's very important to point out, the same entities tied to the satellite company that we discuss in this piece is also the same network that is building the U.S. smart wall. One of the main contractors for building this smart wall is a company called Anduril that's was created by a guy named Palmer Luckey and this other figure named Trey Stevens. Palmer Luckey is the creator of Oculus Rift, the virtual reality system that was sold to Facebook with the help of Peter Thiel, Peter Thiel being the co-founder and creator of Palantir. And Palmer Luckey's Anduril has been funded by Founders Fund, which is Peter Thiel, and a partner. Trey Stevens is a veteran of U.S. intelligence, veteran of Palantir, who then, with Palmer Luckey, created Anduril and is, works for Founders Fund, and was also on the board of Carbine 911, this Israeli intelligence front that was funded by Jeffrey Epstein and chaired for a significant amount of time by Ehud Barak. the former commander of Unit 8200 on its board. Trey Stevens was one of the few, I think the only like American citizen that was on the board of that when it launched, and he's still on the board now with Michael Chertoff, former head of the DHS, alongside him. And Anduril is specifically creating autonomous weapons for the U.S. military. They've been piloted in Ukraine, for example, and the goal of Palmer Luckey is to have completely autonomous warfare without human oversight. He's tried to get away from that and say that's not the case, but he's also on video elsewhere saying that is the case. And this is very troubling because the same type of, surveillance systems that, recognize your face and facial recognition and all of that are also being used to target and murder people. Right. In war zones right now. And Palantir and a lot of these Peter Thiel funded companies have been tested, significantly in places like Ukraine, and also they've teamed up with Israel for their war on Gaza. And this stuff later could be exported and create a paradigm where no human oversight. You're on a list. You're trying to cross a border of some country. I mean, bad things could happen. I mean, we are sleepwalking into a nightmare here, and it's very disturbing when you consider that Anduril and a lot of these other companies are contractors to the U.S. military, contractors to U.S. intelligence, really intimately tied up with the exact same deep state that Trump supporters revile. And Trump himself no longer supports a physical barrier. As of 2019, he said, we're all in on the smart wall. Mexico, as he promised, right, he was gonna get them to pay for a physical wall, but Mexico has actually paid to help build the smart wall. Democrats love the smart wall. One of the biggest proponents of the smart wall that helped get Anduril these contracts is this former CIA officer turned congressman, William Hurd. And, the CIA wants this border wall, and it also is the same exact type of biometric entry and exit system that's being rolled out throughout the European Union and all these other places, but it's being framed as a way, to stop the globalist agenda of migration, but of illegal immigration. But frankly, the migration situation in the U.S. has been bad well before independent media started to pay more attention to it over the course of the past year. And I think, if Democrats and Republicans both agree about this and the Biden administration, is on its way out, why would they, I think what they've been doing on the border is allowing a desperate situation to take place so that the opposing side can come in and offer the solution, which is the solution both parties have wanted for the better part of 20 years. After 9/11, they tried to do the same smart wall on the Bush administration. It was called SBI Net. And, that's essentially what Anduril and General Dynamics and some of these other firms are now building. And it's not necessarily great for, I would argue it's not good for freedom at all. And it could be used to keep people in just as much as it could theoretically keep people out. And even in the places where these smart walls exist, it's not like they're necessarily keeping people out. I think the idea is to have get people so worked up and angry about illegal immigration, even though it's been something that's been going on for decades. But have people so focused on it now so that we can they can manufacture consent for this smart wall. That's, all these intelligence contractors and people tied to the deep state. I don't know. I mean, I think there's definitely a lot more going on here, and it definitely deserves a lot of scrutiny. And I don't think it's the answer that it's being pitched as.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of cover being given right now to on those folks on the right who are in lockstep with this uniparty idea to monitor, surveil, and to continue to build out this infrastructure here. And there's sort of like a willful ignorance when it comes to some of these leaders right now, especially Trump. I think there's a lot of willful ignorance going around about Trump and the support of the Ukraine bill and all of these things right now. So it's really terrifying. It's really terrifying to think that this is coming. Well, Whitney, as always, you've blown our minds, and I'm sorry I didn't say a word most of the interview. When I'm on with you, sometimes if I jump in, my audience will say, "Don't interrupt her." So I don't. I know better. I know better than to jump in. I want to hear every nugget of thought that goes through your mind. So thank you as always, Whitney. I'll link up this in the description. People can read this latest piece it's at Bitcoin Magazine, right?
Mm-hmm.
At Bitcoin Magazine. So people can check out your latest piece on these satellites. And then, of course, the coming smart wall. We'll have more discussions about that, I'm sure. And I know, going back years on this Clear. Remember, like Clear, you sign up at the airport with you scan your eyeball. And it was, I remember even like 15 years ago, that's the promise. You can zip right through security and no problems. You'll be flying right on the plane and you'll be the first one there. You don't have to worry about it anymore because we've got your eyeball just in your face. It's terrifying.
Yeah, they're trying to get people to voluntarily comply with this digital ID agenda. And the way to stop it is to not comply and to not use this system. It's just going to be, the vaccine passports were a beta test for this. The same exclusionary nature of the vaccine passport is exactly how digital IDs will function. And the way to defeat vaccine passports was not to use them, not to enter into that system, not to comply. And it's the exact same for digital ID. If anything, vaccine passports were their efforts to trial out a digital ID style system. And the people that produced digital ID were really the people helping engineer vaccine passports during the COVID era. It's all about restricting people's freedom of movement. And if you willingly give them your biometrics, you're helping usher in this type of system. And the idea is to make people feel worried about crime, worried about their safety as a way to get people to onboard into these systems. But to paraphrase Benjamin Franklin, the more you give up for security, the less liberty you will have. So, they want us to, out of fear, give up our freedoms. And this is happening across the board, not just with digital ID and the smart wall stuff, but really on a lot of other different fronts. And the way to get out, around that is to not give into that fear, know what they're pushing for. And unfortunately, I think that we're going to see unprecedented efforts to get people in independent media, mainstream media, left and right, whoever they can pay off to promote the stuff to people. But it's ultimately a bipartisan agenda. This is the sustainable development agenda. There's nothing sustainable about it except that it's sustainable for the power elite. It's been written by bankers who want to essentially enslave the entire planet even more with debt and surveil everything you do. Because surveillance, as far it relates to banking and markets, it helps, the predictability of markets. They like that. And that's why you have people like BlackRock's Larry Fink openly say, the markets like totalitarian governments. That's the kind of government that people like Larry Fink are dictatorships. Right. And there's an effort to impose that on the world under different dialectics. Some they're going to try and sell it in places, I don't know, that are more amenable to it, like under left-leaning rhetoric, like sort of being done in different EU countries. In the US, they're probably going to sell it as freedom and all of this other stuff. And that's why you have Anduril, Palantir, these companies saying, we love freedom, America first, and things like that. But they're building the same totalitarian surveillance dystopian nightmare and putting an American flag on it. And I really hope that Americans can see through the ruse and reject it.
Hallelujah.
And not comply.
Yeah, you're right about that. Benjamin Franklin was wise beyond his years and absolutely correct about that. And they always couch it with fear. They always try to get you roped in with a culture of fear to give up your liberty.
They did it with 9/11. They did it with COVID. It's controlling people through fear. And the way to break out of that is to not buy the fear that they're selling. And the more they manipulate online media through censorship, buying up different platforms, trying to centralize control, get you to tie your government ID to internet access, the more they'll try and gin up that fear-based, media content to try and get you agitated and fearful and compliant. And that's ultimately where this leads. And so we have to be wise to the greater policy agendas here. It's bigger than one party. It's bigger than both parties. This is a truly global agenda with a global surveillance component. And it's coming for our finances. It's coming for our society. It's a multi-pronged attack. And the way to oppose it is to not comply and not give in to the fear.
Yeah, 100%. Whitney Webb, always great to see you. Thank you so much for your amazing insights, as always, your amazing research, And we will see you real soon. Thank you, Whitney.
Thank you. Take care.
Whew, that was a lot. That was like 2
Wrap your head
shows
around.
in one, but you can't stop. That's hot stuff.
No, I do not
know
interrupt Whitney. As I just said, like sometimes because I want to, jump in. I have a question, and people in the chat will say like, don't interrupt her. So I will not interrupt Whitney Webb.
Yeah.
You do not interrupt a genius like that.
No, when the wheels are going, you stay out of the way. That's what we do
Exactly.
here on Redacted. We're here to learn. So we want to thank her for her time. She's very generous with her time and wonderful. Wow. Okay.
We've got more news to get to here. Yeah. On
I
your
was just
Thursday.
going to say that we have more news to get to. Yes. I'll tell them about it.
Okay,
Why
go
not?
ahead.
We want to tell you about the new World Health Organization pandemic treaty because we finally have the draft. They were late. Does it matter? I think it does. But at least they've caved on a lot of things that they had put in the terrifying document. It's less terrifying, and we're going to take a look at it. Plus, we're going to talk about Justin Trudeau's opponent, whether or not he's an extremist for going to an anti-carbon tax rally. That's what Trudeau would like you to think. Plus, an upcoming United Nations meeting to take over the world. We're going to watch what those guys are up to. I don't like the sounds of it, and we're going to have a reporter here to tell us all about it. But first, we want to tell you about our friends over at Shopify, because did you know that the Redacted store runs on Shopify? If you have something that you'd like to announce to the world, you should try Shopify too. You can use our link, shopify.com/redacted, and you can sign up for a $1 per month trial period. So with Shopify, you don't have to learn how to build a retail store in order to start selling things. They will help you. They have it all figured out. They have customer service support so that you can start selling whatever it is you have to present to the world, whether it's bracelets or, I don't know, shoes, whatever a store like Redacted, the world needs to see what you have to show it. So again, you can go to shopify.com/redacted, sign up for a $1 per month trial period, and you'll see your first sale right away. They can support you all the way from launch stage to, oh my gosh, we made $1 million stage. Shopify is there to help you grow. So support Shopify, you're supporting Redacted, and also support yourself with an online store. If you start a store on Shopify, send it to us. We want to see it. We'll be excited that you've tried it out. It's shopify.com/redacted.
And let us know where you're joining us from around the world today. Good to see all of you guys. Just drop it in the chat here and let us know. Are you joining us from the U.S., Australia, New Zealand,
Europe,
India,
Africa, Asia?
Let us know. Drop it in. We always love to see where you guys are joining us from. So thank you guys so much for dialing us up on a Thursday night.
All right. Well, the World Health Organization has made major changes to their pandemic treaty. So it's not the power grab that we've been freaking out about. It's still a power grab. I'm still freaking out, but less. So I'm not going to call this a win. I'm going to call it progress, because at least the WHO knew that we were hip to their plan to usurp sovereignty of all member nations. They're not trying to do that, but they still are trying to grab power. So at least they were listening. They're like, oh, our evil plan's been thwarted. We better dial down the evil a little.
Or
but
hide
the
it.
plan is still in place.
Yeah.
Well, let's look together at these changes, the nuances of them, and you can decide whether or not it's hidden. Is it still there? I still don't want it. I'm still dead set against it, and for various reasons. But let's at least remind ourselves what we were the most afraid of is that this was a document that the WHO was trying to pass that would give them the power to implement pandemic measures such as lockdowns, vaccines, and other treatments. And it would mandate population censorship and surveillance and give the WHO the power to declare anything they wanted a pandemic risk, and then say, oh, change that. So for instance, the way you grow your tomatoes, the way you eat local meat, all of that stuff, they could say, oh, pandemic risk, we're taking it. That was what the original document said. This is not me extrapolated. It was written. Now, the vote is due on this in the next couple months, and they were supposed to provide a draft version at least 4 months in advance so that politicians could read it. But they didn't. They were unforgivably late. They published it this week, and we're at the end of April right now. A vote is supposed to happen in May. So are they trying to just slip things in? Well, it's a much shorter document, so at least politicians can be expected to read it. Let's go over it. Here it is. You can see published 2024 proposal for WHO pandemic agreement. Now, we linked you to it in the newsletter today, redacted.inc, so you can and should find it for yourself. We're going to look at it, but first I want to say that I don't think any government or organization should defer to this group, the WHO, period. They are sovereign rapists. That's what they are. When it was found out that they did let their doctors and staff basically act as a brothel in the Congo, they investigated themselves and then paid victims $250 each, but only if they went to classes. Please, I beg you to watch this video that we did on this Congo scandal and the WHO, because you will learn all about it and learn exactly why they were never punished for this. And in fact, they are out of reach from punishment because they are sovereign. This is not the organization that should be making rules for the world. It's bad enough that YouTube defaults to the WHO in terms of their policy, meaning that we here on Redacted on YouTube cannot say anything that contradicts any health conditions and substances or guidances from the WHO. Even though the WHO got a lot wrong during the COVID-19 pandemic, including masking, which is so funny because if you now today go to the WHO's page for their guidance on masks, it says this, take a look. It says masks may provide protection, even though there's a lot of data showing that this is not true and that masking is not a neutral act. In fact, it can harm people. Here is just one of many examples of the WHO not following the medical research. But if we can put that screen back up, take a look at what it says there in orange. It's hard to see. It says, this page is no longer being updated. It remains live for reference purposes only. That says to me that they know they were wrong about masks, but they won't update it with the most current research. So they'll leave it as it is in case they want to implement masking again. Don't you think that's unconscionable? Is this the group? We're putting our eggs in this basket? All this to say that the WHO sucks. They should not be given any other power inside of any government or business, but they are still trying. So again, let's go back to the document. The most important part that they removed is the non-binding language. So before it said, your government, I don't know, Ireland, the UK, the United States, you sign here, what we say is now binding. They have removed that. So that's good, but it is very hard to get out. I'm going to show you that in a second. They still make the argument, though, that countries need to work together to manage and prevent pandemics. And this is the language here that gives me a stomach ache that's still in there. I realize this is hard screenshot for you to see, so you can screenshot this and zoom in if you want. But what they're saying is that pandemic prevention and public health surveillance is still important. So they need all member states collaborative surveillance. I don't like that word. And they still give themselves the power to decide anything is a risk of a pandemic. You see at the bottom, they say the parties recognize that environmental, climatic, social, anthropogenic, and economic factors increase the risk of pandemics and endeavors to identify these factors and take them into consideration in the development and implementation of relevant policies, strategies, and measures in the international regional levels. So basically, they are saying they can adapt necessary guidelines, recommendations, and standards about everything. So, okay, something that's environmental concern, something they think is a social concern, we need to be watching that, surveying it, and if we decide that it's a risk, then we can change it. We can change what that land is used. So they could, again, decide that livestock farming is a risk, or any other food farm or a business is a climate change exacerbator, and that maybe could make it sick. And then they say, we need to shut those things down. They drive this home with the idea of One Health. They say that each country's farming practice basically is everyone's business because the world has the right to One Health. It says in order to promote One Health approach for pandemic preparedness, recognizing the interconnection between people, animals, and environment, that is coherent, integrated, coordinated, and collaborated. So what they're saying is they want to implement regular reviewing practices of reviewing national policies and strategies. So you have to submit to this as a country. And each country will agree to regular reviews of its animals. But look at the last one there, C, saying that they have to send in some trainers or educators to make sure that countries are doing the things that they want. Okay, can we make sure that those trainers and educators not be rapists?
I think they should change that wording too to re-educators. It's like re-education camp, because it's like they're re-educating what they've already been doing for possibly centuries.
Right. How do we assure, though, that we get a rape-free WHO staff this time? Congo didn't get that. Just curious. It's not in their paperwork here, given that that's what happened in Africa.
Maybe in their hiring, when they go through the hiring, like on your application to hire, your resume.
Yeah.
That should be like a checkbox that they have to check now.
Check a box like of what 1 to 10, where are you on the rape situation?
Right.
Yeah.
1 to 10.
How many rapes have you done in your life?
I'm not sure you're aware. We have a little bit of a history with this problem here at our company. Just curious, where do you come down on that as a potential employee of our company?
Right. Okay, so let's say there's a woman who's poor and has children and she's single. Do you make her have sex with you in order to get the job? Yes or no? No. The answer's no. We're supposed to not be doing that.
Is that wrong? Should I not have done that?
That's exactly what they did in Congo. Okay, here's another thing that I do not like in this treaty. They want each country to make sure that the laws in that country allow the WHO to make emergency declarations. Now let's take a look at this and tell me what this says to you. Does this say to you that they want to make sure that if they take your freedoms away, the laws allow it? Look at this Article 14, regulatory strengthening, that each party, that means country, shall take steps to ensure that it has the legal, administrative, and financial frameworks in place to support emergency regulatory authorizations for effective and timely approval of pandemic-related health products during a pandemic. And then look before, each party shall strengthen rapid alert systems against substandard and falsified pandemic-related health problems. So this says to me, they want to make sure they have the right to implement whatever they want and that there should not be any local laws that stop them. Anybody else read it that way? Philip? David?
Yeah,
No?
I mean, definitely.
I think so.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
For sure.
Of course, they don't want sovereign power. So, of course, if they can sidestep any local laws, this is what we're handing over to them.
Right. So
This
they're
is the whole point of it.
saying if there's consider the law that we went over in Louisiana that said the WHO shall not implement anything in Louisiana.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So what they're saying is that we need to go through your local ordinances, and if there's anything there that says you can't implement a lockdown, you can't have vaccine mandates, or you can't have any kind of forced medical examinations, anything like that, forced testing, that we need to make sure we strip those out of your laws so that we have the right to put in any emergency that we want and any plan that we'd like. One thing, though, remember this placeholder that was in the draft last year where they had not defined these things yet, like potential for a pathogen or One Health surveillance or interpandemic or infodemic? Well, the infodemic was the thing that I really was worried about. Keeps me up at night, I'll admit, and interpandemic. But they never defined it in this document. They left it out altogether. Now, remember that this was from a previous WHO document that defined an infodemic as an overabundance of information, even accurate information, that made it difficult for individuals to adopt behaviors that basically the WHO wanted. So even if you were getting accurate information about the risks of vaccines, that made it hard for them to put a vaccine in you. So that was an infodemic, true information about a certain vaccine. You might know what I'm talking about. Well, infodemic is gone, at least from this document, but the spirit of it is there with what they call communication and public awareness. What they want to do is strengthen science, public health, and pandemic literacy. So they want to educate you I mean, you can hear that I'm putting educate in quotes here, to what they want you to know. Also, they want to conduct research to inform policies on factors that hinder or strengthen adherence to public health and social measures. So they want to find out why you might be hesitant to do what they want. Research those things. They didn't say stop it, but they want to research it and educate you exactly how they want to. And
so that means...
Go ahead.
They're going to start going into the grade schools and everything, and we're going to see a big push for reefer madness again. You guys ever see that? You know,
No.
that kind of thing? Those propaganda films that are going to tell kids, okay, kids, here, your parents aren't on board with this probably, but this is important for the world to believe these things. It's indoctrination.
Okay. That's literally in 1984 when you tell your own parents. Like the neighbor goes to jail because his daughter reports him. Okay. And who will pay for this? Well, the WHO will decide what you pay. It's like omakase. You know what that is? The Japanese meal. Is that what you call it, Philip? Do you know? Where you, like, they just bring out whatever they decide you're going to eat, and then the bill is really expensive because they've decided. I think that's what it's called. That's basically how we will sign up for that. Can you look that up? Is it omakase? I'm pretty sure.
How do you spell
anyway, just like it sounds.
Right.
So what they're saying here is they're going to look into your country's budget, decide, they're going to conduct relevant needs and gaps. So they'll just look, what does the United States have? This is what they can afford. Okay, great. This is what we're going to charge you. And they will decide.
By the way.
It's omakase.
Omakase.
Okay.
Yeah, it literally means I'll leave it up to you. Commonly used when dining at a Japanese restaurant, where the customer leaves it up to the chef to decide. Like when eating at Morimoto in Philadelphia.
Yeah, this is
He just would make whatever he would.
This is like what you don't want to go out with your friends, because then you end up with like a $500 bill and you're like, how'd this happen? And I ate 5 things.
Could you imagine if every like fast food, McDonald's and all that did that? You just walked in and they hand you a bag and it's like, thank you. You just walk out and like, I don't wonder what I got today.
The McPlant.
Yeah.
I don't want the McPlant. What kind of garbage is this?
And it's $150.
Yeah.
Basically the WHO is omakase for nation states. So if it will go on your tax bill. Who knows what it costs? They did not give us a budget. Now, this treaty is a 5-year agreement, and it's set to be revised every 5 years. But if your country wants to withdraw, so let's say you're Canada, Justin Trudeau signs the document, but then you vote in Pierre Poilievre, and he wants to withdraw from the WHO pandemic treaty. He can only do so 2 years after it was signed into law, and your withdrawal takes a full year. So take a look at these terms, is that you can withdraw only 2 years from the date that it was signed, and a withdrawal takes 1 year from the date of receipt. So you're in it for at least 3 years, no matter what. You can only get out. It's like a gym membership. You can't. Thanks for that notice that you're leaving. You're on the hook for another full year.
What I want to know is, does the WHO have their own military? Because if not, then get bent. I'll leave when I want to. What are they going to do?
Right.
Come at me, bro.
I don't know. They must have some kind of secret, like Janissary army. I don't know. And again, if your country agrees to it, here are the dates that they will sign it, that it will get kicked off is June 17th and this World Health Assembly in June. And thereafter at the United Nations headquarters in New York from July of 2025. So tick-tock, you guys, this is coming. So all of these edits, are they a ploy to get countries that are against this to buy into it? Such as we should ask these leaders who have spoken out against it. Here is Robert Fico, the new prime minister of Slovakia, who recently said Slovakia will absolutely not be signing any pandemic treaty. Watch.
Že smer Slovenská sociálna demokracia nebude podporovať posilnenie právomocí Svetovej zdravotníckej organizácie na úkor suverénnych štátov pri riadení boja proti pandémiám. Poviem to, že takýto nezmysel mohli vymyslieť len nenažraté farmaceutické firmy, ktoré začali vnímať odpor niektorých vlád proti povinnej vakcinácii. Podľa ústavy Slovenskej republiky sa na platnosť takýchto medzinárodných dohôd v prospech Svetovej zdravotníckej organizácie vyžaduje súhlas Národnej rady Slovenskej republiky. A ja neverím, že suverénne slovenské politické strany takýto súhlas vyslovia. Smer a jeho poslanci určite nie.
Okay. Now, New Zealand, the new Deputy Prime Minister Ron Winston Peters has also spoken out against the WHO, indicating he is not on board with this post here. Also, in Japan, there have been massive rallies in the last few weeks, even against the WHO, and these have been peacefully organized. Watch. Okay, so what do you think? Did they tone it down because they had to? Will world leaders say, oh, hey, it's less evil, we'll sign it now? My take on it is I still absolutely don't want it. I want it in the shredder. But what do you think? Read it for yourself and let us know in the comments below.
More news to get to here on your Thursday. We're going to talk about this globalist cabal meeting, which if you thought you knew about the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization meetings, or Davos, or the Bilderberg meetings and all of that, wait until you hear about the new UN globalist meeting. We're going to talk about that. Also, Justin Trudeau is taking on Alex Jones, thinks that anybody who in Canada is against his carbon tax must be a extremist who watches Alex Jones. Like that's the strategy now. So we'll get to that in a minute. But first,
we want to tell you about our friends over at Sleep Doctor, because if you are constantly feeling tired or struggling to maintain focus or finding it difficult to stay awake, it probably isn't your fault. Sleep disorders are incredibly prevalent these days. In fact, 3 out of 4 U.S. adults have a sleep disorder symptoms. They can be very dangerous. In fact, there are studies that show that driving while tired are just as bad, if not worse, than driving while drunk. You really should not do either. You should be getting a good night's sleep. That's why we want to tell you about Sleep Doctor's sleep test. You can get the test in your own bed for a fraction of the cost. Starting is easy. First, you schedule a brief video chat with a board-certified physician to approve your at-home sleep test. Then you'll receive your device in 3 business days. That's easy to use, records your at-sleep breathing patterns, and automatically shares results with the doctor, all in one night's sleep. After your doctor reviews the sleep data, you can receive a personalized sleep report and a therapy recommendation if diagnosed. There really is nothing more important than sleeping. Sleep is critical to overall health, and understanding your sleep is the first step to improve it. In fact, I once read a study about mice that were kept awake for days on end. They were put like on a treadmill or dunked in water if they tried to sleep, and until they eventually died, which is the worst way to go. No, just dying of being sleepy. I hope those mice were like Hitler reincarnate, because that sounds really cruel. But nevertheless, when they were dissected, they had all manner of disease, because if you don't sleep, your body breaks down and starts to, and your health is just taken from you. So make sleep your priority. Take charge of your health. You can get 50% off your at-home sleep apnea test kit through our link here. It's trysleepdoctor.com/redacted. Your body and mind will thank you for it. Once again, that's trysleepdoctor.com/redacted.
Well, Justin Trudeau appears to be terrified of Alex Jones. Why is he so terrified of Alex Jones? Is it the awareness about his globalist scheme that Alex and others have been exposing? Is that why? And by the way, if you come out against Trudeau's carbon tax or any of Trudeau's programs, then you're labeled an extremist who supports Alex Jones. And that seems to be the case with Pierre Poilievre, of course, who's the conservative opposition to Justin Trudeau, who showed up at a protest against this massive carbon tax to show his support and solidarity with those Canadians who say enough is enough. This whole thing is a climate scam. To which Justin Trudeau was asked about Pierre Poilievre showing up at this protest, and a reporter was pretty brave in actually asking Trudeau about Pierre Poilievre's statements. I want you to listen to how Justin Trudeau responds and blasts Alex Jones. Watch.
Hi, Michelle Song with CBC News. Your opponent was photographed posing with anti-carbon tax protesters flying F Trudeau flags. In the video, Pierre Poilievre is heard saying that you are a liar and everything you say is, quote, bullshit. Can we get your response, please?
Every politician has to make choices about what kind of leader they want to be. Are they a kind of leader that is going to exacerbate divisions, fears, and polarization in our country, make personal attacks, and welcome the support of conspiracy theorists and extremists? Because that's exactly what Pierre Poilievre continues to do, not just when you see him engaging with members of Diagolon, but also when he refuses to condemn and reject the endorsement of Alex Jones.
So you're an extremist if you stand against Justin Trudeau's ridiculous carbon tax and if you throw your lot in with those like Alex Jones. I want to bring in David Creighton, a Canadian journalist who's been covering this quite extensively. You posted about this yesterday on X, about this contradiction here, and I want to get your take on this. David, welcome to the show.
Nice to be back, Clayton, as always.
Great to see you. So, I think what's hilarious about all of this is that you get to attack, Alex Jones, Pierre Poilievre, but what he does by attacking those individuals is obfuscating, ignoring the real extremist position here, in my mind, which is the whole idea of carbon being the reason that the earth is warming, this idea that we're some sort of a climate alarmists and we're going to tax carbon because that's the reason why the earth is burning up right now. No one's really calling him out on these ridiculous positions. What did you make of his response to this reporter and Pierre's appearance at this rally?
Well, a couple of things, Clayton. I found it interesting that Trudeau is so prepared to answer this question and to go into Diagolon, for instance, which is a group that has been erroneously identified with the Freedom Convoy protest. We know that was a complete lie. There was no connection there at all. So he's obviously prepared. I'd like to know who briefed him that this question was coming. Clearly, he was ready for this question, and he had his talking points all in order. And so what does he talk about? Alex Jones. Yes, of course, this has something to do with Alex Jones, when in fact there are protests that continue to occur across the country against Trudeau's carbon tax, which went up, as we said, on April 1st by 23%. So people are furious about this. And to call these people extremists and to say they belong to some shadowy group called Diagolon, and that this has something to do with Alex Jones, once again, Trudeau is refusing to address the unpopularity of his carbon tax and the fact that it's doing absolutely nothing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And arguably, if these have anything to do with climate change, it's been a complete failure. It's impoverished people, but he won't talk about the issues. You bring up anything to Justin Trudeau, his response is immediately, this is about climate change somehow, or it's about Ukraine. That's his other favorite issue. But he loves to harp on climate change no matter what the issue is. And now Alex Jones is Trudeau's bête noire. This is the black beast in Trudeau's backyard. And anything Pierre Poilievre does now comes back to this pseudo-endorsement that Alex Jones gave of Pierre Poilievre. He simply said, this guy's the real deal. I've been watching him for years, and I think he's the real deal. I think that's a very valid statement to make. And suddenly,
well, it's the same strategy they're using in the United States, David, because you and I were talking the other day. It's like Mitch McConnell's strategy, right, on this Ukraine aid funding bills to blast people like Tucker Carlson and Alex Jones, and so it seems like a strategy from these guys, these globalists, who want it's in an effort to discredit what they're saying. And of course, Alex Jones, I mean, wherever you come down on Alex Jones, it doesn't matter. He's been right consistently on these issues. And all Alex and all we do here on this show is calling out this globalist agenda. We're calling out this ridiculous carbon tax. We're calling out, as we just did with Whitney Webb just here on the show, broke down exactly what's going to happen with monitoring your carbon footprint in Canada as part of a digital ID program. So they will be monitoring your tracking, your output in Canada, just as well as in Latin America. This is coming. This is all part of this globalist agenda, this WEF globalist agenda. And when you call that out, they try to label you some sort of a conspiracy theorist who's thrown your lot in with tinfoil hat wearing Alex Jones, and it backfires on them.
I don't think it's really working. As I said the other day in a column, Trudeau's BS just doesn't have the efficacy it used to have with Canadians. They see through this nonsense, this mirage he constantly puts up. And for Pierre Poilievre to be calling out the carbon tax is having incredible resonance with Canadians. And for Justin Trudeau to constantly talk about climate change as being the problem for everything in this country, forest fires, floods, everything is now attributable to climate change. And this is, of course, nonsense, absolute rubbish. But Poilievre, I think, is being very effective in staying on the issues. Yes, he said...
That's what I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to ask you. So Trudeau wants to label him an extremist, throwing in with Alex Jones, et cetera. But Pierre Poilievre has been there. He was specifically talking about the carbon tax. So he goes to this protest, and he's really been focusing on this 20% increase, how it's going to affect average Canadians, why it's... Can you talk about the specifics of what Pierre Poilievre is doing that seems to be pretty effective?
Well, he's been doing these Axe the Tax rallies across Canada. I attended one in Ottawa. They're extremely effective because they bring together thousands of people who are furious about the increase. And it's going up again. This is not the end of it. It continues to go up. And people are hurting from this, not only in terms of just buying gasoline at the pump, but for heating their homes. Farmers in particular are very, very affected by this because they have to heat barns in the winter. And it's tens of thousands of tax dollars involved here. And Trudeau refuses to acknowledge the pain of Canadians. He refuses to acknowledge that this is a failure, that it isn't even achieving the results that he claims it's achieving. It's not reducing emissions. People still have to drive to work. They still have to heat their homes. There's no magical green energy solution out there for this. And Poilievre is consistently staying on these issues. Yes, he said Trudeau lies, and he does. Yes, he said that there's a lot of BS going on in Ottawa. Of course there is, just as there is in Washington. And Canadians are really saying, I think Poilievre understands what we're going through. So he can show up at a rally. He can get out of his car. And this was not staged. He was literally driving across the provincial border from New Brunswick to Nova Scotia. He sees a carbon tax rally. He had nothing to do with organizing that rally. He gets out of his car. He joins the rally. They applaud. They say, hey, it's Pierre Poilievre. If Justin Trudeau got out of his car and went to a protest, there would be chaos. He can't go anywhere without igniting a protest, without people running after him with signs saying, Justin Trudeau, you're a liar. So this demonstrates how Poilievre really does have the grasp of the common people, the average Canadian, whereas
but
Justin
they're extremists,
Trudeau
David. They're extremists, and they're using this strategy to label these average Canadians as extremists. So I'd be curious to hear from any of our Canadian viewers who are watching right now, how do you feel to be labeled an extremist because you're against this carbon tax increase? It's this strategy. When I was in Berlin, covering the farmers in Berlin who descended on the Capitol and said enough is enough with your massive increases in taxes to destroy German farmers. The same thing with the Netherlands. Those individuals, those farmers in Germany were labeled extremists because they wanted their way of life protected, and they were against the massive increase in taxes, the fuel taxes and other things. So they're extremists. And that's what these individuals, these farmers in Canada are being labeled extremists. Have you talked to any of these farmers when you were at these rallies? How do they like to be labeled as extremists? Do they enjoy that?
Well, about as much as you or I would enjoy being labeled an extremist. And they asked me, how is it extreme to say that we just simply cannot afford to live anymore, that our taxes are too high, that it's impoverishing us, it's making our livelihood impossible, it's making life impossible? That's not extremism. But But Justin Trudeau is facing a leadership challenge right now within his own party. That was huge news last week. His budget was an absolute failure. It has not given him any boost in the polls. 50% of Canadians don't like it at all. Only 8% of those who saw the budget said it would make them more likely to vote Liberal. The vast majority say they're thumbs down to this budget. Trudeau's in political trouble. So what does he do when he's in political trouble? Much like the Democrats in the United States, and as you said earlier, Clayton, they reach for these labels. They start calling their opponents extremists. My God, and Trudeau is capable of calling his political opponents anything, racist, misogynist, and even Nazis. That's how brutal this man is. That's how unthinking he can be, how unfeeling he can be. But that is indicative of a Justin Trudeau and his unalloyed narcissism.
Hallelujah. Well, we're going to continue to watch this. So you have an election in 2025. So there's a long way to go here before the end of this road. And when is this next carbon tax increase set to come? We already had the one on April 1st. When is that about to go up again?
In about 6 months' time. There's more coming. It's just like aid to Ukraine. It never ends. There's always more coming down the road. But we might not have to wait till 2025, Clayton, because the New Democratic Party, this is a socialist opposition party that is unofficially allied with Justin Trudeau in a sort of a coalition government, de facto coalition government, is very concerned about losing all of their core support over the carbon tax. They might not support this budget. And if they don't support the budget, it's a non-confidence vote and the Trudeau government will fall. Everybody of common sense is hoping the NDP has a bit of common sense and realizes their head is on the chopping block. If they continue to support the Trudeau government, they should do the common sense thing and vote against it.
I'll be watching. David Creighton from Ottawa. As always, check out his YouTube channel, Creighton's Right. Great to see you, and you can follow him on X as well. David, great to see you. Thank you so much for being common sense up there in Canada. We appreciate it. We need more of you.
Thank you so much, Clayton.
Thanks so much, David. Absolutely crazy. So we'll see. Maybe they'll get a no confidence vote and the Trudeau government will collapse ahead of the election. Wouldn't that be amazing? So we'll keep watching that. Coming up in a minute, we're going to talk about this globalist cabal meeting. Hey, we got a long show for you tonight, but we hope that we're bringing you value on this Thursday night. Hopefully that, hope we're not getting in the way of other things for you guys right now, but
You're here. We're here. We appreciate it. We got stuff to say, so let's do it.
But first, we want to tell you about our friends at Moomoo, because right now it is interesting to note this historical meeting we're in right now. April has been one of the best performing months for the U.S. stock market, April and May. Of course, that's all due to earnings season, right? You get all the companies announcing earnings, and you get the mainstream media trying to slam different companies. I've been really enjoying watching the mainstream media try to take down Tesla, and then they come out with like amazing news. And this is the thing, this is the strategy. They hate Elon Musk, right? So they do that. Well, the same thing with NVIDIA right now. NVIDIA, this is one of the stocks that seems to be on everyone's radar. They're announcing big, huge first quarter results, surpassing the $900 mark, nearly doubling in value. But a lot of these big stocks are expensive. Tesla stock is expensive. NVIDIA stock is expensive. That's why I'm excited to tell you about our friends at Moomoo, because now you can actually buy fractional shares. Yes, fractional shares of some of these bigger stocks for as little as $5. You can invest in some of these higher priced stocks. The way to take advantage of this is to go to redacted.inc/Moomoo. That's how you download the free app. And as an exclusive benefit for United States users who sign up using my link down below, you can receive up to 10 fractional shares upon completing your first deposit of $100. That's 3 more than the standard new user bonus. So you get that NVIDIA included directly for free. You also get Apple, Amazon, Meta. You won't miss out on any of the tech giants' surprise earnings season during this period. The limited time exclusive offer is available only when you sign up via our link, so don't miss out. And Canadian users can trade on Moomoo TSFA, tax-free savings account with fees as low as less than 1 penny per share. Watch your assets grow tax-free. And users can also receive up to $2,400 in welcome bonuses when they meet that deposit requirement. That's right. That's just one of the many strengths that Moomoo offers. It provides advanced trading functionalities due to pre- and post-market trading, which extends users up to 16 hours of trading time. So give it a try for free. right now. And be sure to sign up through my link. That's redacted.inc/Mumu to have the chance to receive extra 3 fractional shares in addition to the standard 7 that you get for signing up, along with that 5.1% APY from their cash sweep program. Again, redacted.inc/Mumu.
Well, globalists are about to meet this fall to plan a technocratic takeover. That's what our next guest calls the upcoming United Nations meeting called Summit of the Future, where nations will sign this so-called Pact for the Future, and they are expected to declare a planetary emergency. Okay, all of those things sound a little bit worrying. Let's keep an eye on this. Derek Brose is an independent journalist who writes for The Conscious Resistance. He brought this to our attention, so we invited him on to tell us all about it. Thanks for coming back on Redacted.
Thanks for having me back, Natalie. Appreciate it.
Okay, so tell us what this is. Did I get this right? It's a planetary emergency now that they're declaring in order to give themselves power?
You have it absolutely right. I would say that probably most of your audience is familiar already with some of the other globalist meetings in the works, including coming up very soon here in May, the World Health Organization's pandemic treaty, which, as you guys are aware, is the same thing you just said. This is an agreement that they're going to give themselves powers, or pretend that they give themselves powers, so that in the case of some new claimed pandemic, they could declare an emergency and give themselves all kinds of fun powers, probably lockdowns, vaccine mandates, and things of that sort. This sort of ties into that in terms of the overall march towards a world government, which I think more and more people are realizing is the bigger picture for these organizations, the World Economic Forum, the United Nations. And my article particularly focuses on the Club of Rome, as well as another organization called the Commission for the Climate Commission, and another one called the Global Governance Commission. All these sort of globalist organizations tied together. And as you said, this September 22nd, 23rd, in New York City, during the United Nations General Assembly Week, which is an annual meeting, they're having this special meeting called the Summit of the Future that they've been working on now since at least 2020, in the early days of COVID. And so my article, I basically went to trace back, like where did these calls begin, this idea that we need to even remake the UN. They're talking about the idea of UN 2.0. And as you said, these discussions of declaring a planetary emergency, this idea that there are planetary boundaries. And instead of thinking about individual sovereignty or national sovereignty, we need to be thinking in terms of planetary sovereignty. And, that sounds maybe good on some level on the surface, but as we understand these people's true intentions, when you look beyond the surface, it gets a little bit more worrisome.
Okay, who do we need to be sovereign against then? And so this is beyond just climate change, which they've used to give themselves power. This is like our sovereignty against who?
Well, it's climate change definitely ties into this. Folks might be familiar with this term the World Economic Forum's been using in the last couple of years called polycrisis, which is becoming increasingly popular in the mainstream. You're probably going to hear it more. Or one of the ways they say we're facing a triple planetary emergency, and this would be climate change, pollution, and whatever else they want to. They tend to kind of throw different terms in there, but the point is they say we are facing a polycrisis, multiple crises at once, that is unprecedented in their view, and thus we need stronger international global systems to be able to better handle this. And I mean, I think things like climate change, obviously pandemics, these sorts of things, they, at least in the terms of the globalists, they make national borders less relevant. And that's what they want us to believe is for us to properly deal with these terms, we need to move beyond this terms of thinking of Texas or Florida or the United States, and instead thinking of as a global community. But I think anybody who understands these people's intentions, you're not going to throw a bunch of technocratic dictatorial governments into one world government and get something peaceful out of it. So I've been trying to raise the alarm on this. And if I could, I want to just to set the stage for folks. They started talking about this at the 75th anniversary of the UN in June 2020, which you might remember was the same month that the World Economic Forum announced their Great Reset initiative. All of this stuff is tied together. And at that time, the UN declared that we needed to, they were calling on Secretary General Antonio Guterres of the United Nations, saying he needed to put out some recommendations. And at the UN 75th anniversary, they had a declaration that said, quote, "We will leave no one behind. We are determined to implement the 2030 agenda in full and on time. There is no alternative." And then shortly after that, Guterres put out a document called Our Common Agenda. And this is where he said, okay, we need to, quote, "forge new global consensus and prepare ourselves for the future." And that's when they set the date for this Summit of the Future. And as you mentioned, this is the part that kind of worries me the most. They're talking about signing this new global agreement, the Pact for the Future, where they're going to try to get as many of the world's governments on this to sign and essentially recommit to the Sustainable Development Goals, to the Agenda 2030, to the Great Reset, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, all these terms that they like to use. And there's talks of, as I mentioned, UN 2.0, of adapting or adopting new governance models to even go beyond the UN and to make it stronger. And I've watched hundreds of hours now of these talks in the last week to try to get a better understanding. And when you listen to the presentations from the UN, from the World Economic Forum, from the Climate Governance Commission, and all these kind of tangential organizations that are related to this agenda, they discuss specifically it's time to move beyond national borders. It's time to rethink the way we are governing our world. I really believe that this meeting coming up in New York City in September and everything we're seeing leading up to it are going to be some of the biggest steps we've seen in recent years towards a global government.
Okay, so when they say planetary emergency, they do mean things that we can see and touch and feel. It's not like, oh, this threat of aliens, and that's why we need this space force. It's more.
It could be that.
Okay. That's where my mind went.
I mean, I think that's a great place to take the conversation. They leave the door open. Obviously, right now they're focused on climate change, but it absolutely says, so the idea is essentially this. This has been popularized by a guy named Johan Rockström, who's from Sweden, working with a lot of these globalist organizations for the last decade. And he popularized the idea of planetary boundaries. He says that there are 9 different measures based on his research. And he says that humanity has already gone past 6 of them. So it's more kind of climate alarmism, end of the world alarmism. But what they're arguing is that we need to start looking at the world in terms of these different boundaries. And again, not national boundaries, but planetary boundaries. Now that those boundaries could be passed by climate change or other things, but absolutely claims of a UFO invasion or threats from outer space, any of these sort of and as I mentioned, of course, pandemics, any of these sort of emergencies would fit the bill. Right now, climate change is just the main argument they're using. But we should absolutely understand that once the World Health Organization treaty is in place, once the Summit of the Future and the Pact of the Future are signed, at that point, it's up to these governments to say, hey, here's an emergency. That could be an economic emergency. Many people are worried about, financial system. That could help them bring in the CBDCs. And that's another part of this. In one of their own documents about the Summit of the Future titled, "What Would It Deliver?" they say that it's time for a, quote, "a global financial system that works for all people." So they're definitely talking about remaking the financial system along with all of the governance model. So we're talking about a complete remaking of the world as we know it. And as I was doing more research, even beyond my article, it looks like after the Summit of the Future in September, if they do sign this Pact for the Future, that some of these organizations are trying to use the United Nations Article 109, which is basically, it can be implemented. It's very rare, and this is why it would be a big deal. But this would be implemented to actually change the UN Charter, which is essentially the United Nations Constitution. And they're talking about by 2025, 2026, being able to actually rewrite the entire Charter of the United Nations to give themselves further power. So we're really in the middle and kind of watching as they're taking these big steps towards giving themselves more powers that they never should have in the first place. These are unelected people, as we know, with the United Nations, World Economic Forum, the Club of Rome, which is really where all this leads to. And maybe we can touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, what is the Club of Rome?
So the Club of Rome has been around since 1968, and they're just, the most basic way is another one of these globalist organizations that has been warning that climate change, or what they used to call global warming, is going to kill all of humanity. They are also part of the big promotion of overpopulation and essentially eugenics, which now they term population control, birth control, things like this. And the Club of Rome is actually instrumental in the beginning of the World Economic Forum. When you go back to trace the Club of Rome, you see now deceased Henry Kissinger. We know Henry Kissinger was a mentor to Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum. And at the World Economic Forum's third meeting, they actually had the founders of the Club of Rome there. The Club of Rome in the early 70s released a report called The Limits to Growth. And this is a very well-known, infamous report, because it's in this report that they say that they decided humanity should be used as the enemy. They said that basically we should start promoting the idea that humanity is the problem and humanity is endangering the planet. And they publicly say, oh, people are just misinterpreting our statements. We're just recognizing that the climate was going to get worse. But if you look at their words, you look up a gentleman named Dennis Meadows, who is one of the authors of that report with the Club of Rome, with the World Economic Forum. He openly talks about lowering the population and trying to bring the population down. That's what this really comes down to, this reducing carbon, net zero, Agenda 2030. At the end of it, at the heart of it, it is a eugenicist agenda. And that is what this is all about. And the Club of Rome was actually the first organization to start talking about the idea that we should declare a planetary emergency. They've been talking about it for, I'd say, probably decades, but they put out a report in 2019, right before COVID, called the Planetary Emergency Plan. And that's all part of this Pact for the Future, where they're saying we need to create an emergency platform that could be implemented anytime we recognize or they claim that there is an emergency. So this goes back to the Club of Rome, the Rockefeller Foundation, a lot of the same names that people are going to be familiar with. It's just being rebranded. And of course, they're selling it to people. They're trying to sell it to people like us, but they're also trying to sell it to the so-called developing third world nations to get them to go along with it. As I've been watching these video clips of the discussions about the Summit of the Future, nations like Brazil, Mexico, Cuba, African nations, they've been speaking up and saying, hey, we're being left out of this. How come none of our, our suggestions, our recommendations are being listened to? So it seems like there is some resistance, but I think that the goal of the globalists is not only to convince the world population that this is a good thing, but to convince these other developing nations that, come on, join us in this new Pact for the Future. We promise it'll be inclusive, it'll be diverse, equitable, sustainable, etc. But at the end of the day, this is about more power. It's another power grab by the same old players that we've been fighting for generations.
Yikes. Okay, well, I'm glad you broke it down for me, because this is just as terrifying as it reads in your article. And I'm going to suggest everyone read this piece by Derek Brose. And, this goes along with, we just did a segment before you came on about the World Health Organization and how the pandemic treaty revision literally says that each party shall take steps to ensure that it has legal, administration, and financial frameworks in place to support emergency regulatory authorizations. So what they're saying is that anyone who signs this document has to break down their laws so that we can subvert it. That's exactly what they're saying. And it's written right there. So they have the right to go in, look at your country's laws and say, well, we can't break through these things. We can't enforce things on your population. So you need to weaken those so that we can penetrate. So this absolutely is happening. Why do you think it's so brazenly happening in public?
I think the reality is that there is more resistance than there probably ever has been. I mean, obviously, channels like yours are reaching millions of people. There's more and more people who are looking for this information. COVID-1984 woke up a lot of people and has caused many people to start questioning the so-called experts and the institutions that maybe, people went most of their lives generally trusting, okay, yeah, the FDA, CDC, they're probably doing their job. But then as people got a closer look at how these institutions operate, and then, of course, the people behind them, the globalist organizations, the more internationalist organizations, I think people are really seeing where this is going. Now, of course, this is still being deemed conspiracy theory by the mainstream, but we can also see in the mainstream the efforts to debunk and pre-bunk so-called conspiracy theories and misinformation. So they're ramping up their censorship. They're accelerating their plans. And this is because we're sitting here talking, it's April 2024. It's called Agenda 2030, and that's for a reason. They have a vision of completing this transformation of the world in the next 6 to 7 years. And the United Nations themselves, as well as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and other organizations, called the decade we're in right now, at the beginning of 2020, they called it the decade of transformation. So we are right here in the middle of this attempted transformation. And this is either going to be humanity stands up, we push back, whether that's protesting, spreading awareness, sharing videos like this and articles. I also think we need to put our energy into creating our own systems. They want to have a summit of the future. We need to have a people's summit of the future and think about, what does our pact to the future look like? What are we actually trying to create? Because if we know we reject their systems and we don't think there's, that's going to lead to privacy and liberty and freedom and all those things that we desire, then we need to also put energy as individuals, as families, as collectives, as species. What is the world that we want for 2030 and beyond? Because if we don't take active steps to create that, we are going to be swept up into these people's vision. And it is not a vision of freedom. It is not a vision of happiness. It is, you will own nothing and be happy. And so I think if we know that that's not what we want, we need to keep spreading awareness as much as possible. We need to connect with other people who are interested in these ideas and who are looking for solutions. And that's why I'm here to share this with you and your audience.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you for that empowering way to wrap this up, because sometimes we're just like, wow, they're doing this crazy stuff. We're watching, we can do nothing. So I appreciate this take that we can do something. So you can follow Derek's amazing reporting at theconsciousresistance.com or on X at dbrosLiveFree. So thanks for coming back on Redacted.
Thank you so much for having me, Natalie.
All right. Thank you so much, Derek, for that. Wow, we're heavy on the globalists tonight. Heavy on the globalists.
It's our globalist takedown edition on this Thursday night. Holy smokes.
That's what's on the agenda. So, there was a lot of news to get to. This is what we got to. But, we'll have content for you over the weekend, and we'll start right back up on Monday. There's a lot of stories that I still sort of let slip today, and I want back at them.
Well, we have a lot of coverage in our newsletter. If you made it this far in the show tonight, you guys are troopers. Thank you guys so much for standing up for democracy, for freedom, for your liberty. And that's what we try to do, is cover those stories here on your show. We also have a free newsletter. So go to redacted.inc, put in your email address, and you will receive a welcome email from me. Just say you want to receive the newsletter. And on a Monday morning, that's the next time we publish the newsletter, you'll receive it in your inbox at about 7:30 Eastern time. We cover a lot of big stories that you can read in about 5 or 10 minutes over your cup of coffee. And it kind of kickstarts your day with news you're not going to see on CNN or Fox or other places. So we really try to cover the stories you're going to be missed if you pay attention to mainstream corporate media. Again, redacted.inc is the place to go to sign up for our free newsletter. All right, everyone, that's going to do it for us on this Thursday night. Thank you for the marathon edition of Redacted tonight. We hope it wasn't too much of a pain. We hope you learned a lot.
A pain? We hope it was a joy. We're not going for not painful. We're going for fun and enjoyable.
It was a joy for me. I'm happy to be here.
Anyway.
That should be our new slogan, Clayton. Redacted. It doesn't hurt.
Doesn't hurt. Bend over. I'll show you. All right, everyone.
It's not that bad.
It's not that bad.
Not so bad.
Well, truth hurts sometimes, right? All right, guys. We'll see you on Monday. We'll be back here for a live show, and have a great weekend, everyone. It's not that bad.
Bye.